as those who follow my Lindybeige Facebook page would know, I'm going to do a question and answer video with Matt Easton. Okay, now, and I asked people to send in questions, and they sent in, I think they sent in enough. I don't think we're going to run out of questions. I don't think that's going to be the big problem here. Now, first up, Frederick Nielsen asks, do you honestly believe that either of you is capable of giving a quick answer to the questions posed?
Yes.
Luke Bidden, who would win? Next question. Oh, how do I... technology. You see, this is not... I don't have a mobile phone, you see. I do that and I scroll up and it just doesn't scroll up. Why doesn't it scroll up? Why? Haha, he can't do it either. I feel, somehow less stupid. Oh, right, okay, so Kaylee Brown says, with modern body armors becoming ever more effective against ballistic attacks, do you think we will ever see a return of melee weapons as a significant factor in combat?
Well, first up, I would say that I have friends in the armed forces, and melee weapons are still a significant factor in combat, but not necessarily in the sort of Warhammer or kind of fantasy view of how that may be. Bayonets, I've done some videos about bayonets recently, and bayonets are still important objects. I won't go on and on about that, but in terms of increasing body armor, do I think that that will increase the use of hand weapons? No. And the reason is I think that at the same time that body armor is improving, I think that that firearm technology will also improve. So if people start to develop better armor, just as always throughout history, the weapons will improve as well. And ultimately you can offend something, you can damage something far more effectively with an explosive than you can with the power of your muscles.
It does tend to be that the offense is more effective than the defenses against it over time. But I do like the film Dune, where they got those belts with the shield generators and they're going with the knives. So
yeah, and that was explained, I think, because you could only move through them slowly.
Filtered out fast-moving objects.
Yeah, but I think hand weapons are still important, and I know of people who've used bayonets in parts of the world in the last few years, so they're still important for many things, including crowd control and things like that. But yeah, I think ultimately the increase or improvement of armour isn't the thing that will make hand weapons more prevalent.
Okay, I've pressed everything. What? You're just towards the left of the screen?
Yes.
That's where you... Okay, right. So, yes, it's doing it. So, Tom Keeley says, I have heard that had the Roman Empire not collapsed and continued its technological advancements, it would have achieved nuclear power in 200 years. You've heard that, have you? How much faith would you put in that statement?
None. So the Roman Empire didn't collapse as such. It fractured. So it split into the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire and carried on in the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire ultimately was conquered by the Ottoman Turks. And I don't think that, I believe from what I've read, they weren't showing any early signs of developing nuclear power.
Yeah, they didn't have any heavy water, and that's one of the first prerequisites. Yeah. But possibly, if I may, a more interesting question, and this was actually when I was doing my archaeology degree, this one actually came up, was why didn't the Industrial Revolution kick off during the Roman period? Because they had all the people, they had a massive steel industry, they had loads of good communications, so a lot of what was in place for when it did actually start in Britain many centuries later, a lot of those things were apparently in place. And you may be interested to know that the usual answer to this is slavery. That if there was some problem that needed solving, you just put more slaves on it in the Roman period, and that was not not part of the equation when the Industrial Revolution did actually start. And now it's died. Possibly you should do the mobile phone, because I think this is going to happen again.
Okay.
Right, Roman. Oh wow, here we go. Zhamowski. Did ancient and medieval armies have SpecOps units that we know of, used like commandos or marines in the modern days? That's the thing, it's like a successful ninja, you would never know about him because he was a successful ninja. The SpecOps, if they're actually trying to be covert, if they were successful, then they would have been covert, so we wouldn't know about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic answer is sort of yes, in that, there were the Hashashins or assassins. Yes. There were
There are an awful lot of these units that people who like the world's ultimate warrior shows, they just want to big them up, as the kids say these days, into SpecOps so that they can have them against the SAS. Who would win? So forth. But
I think what it comes down to is for most of history, what you've had are scouts and elite guards, should we say, or bodyguards.
Elite guards, definitely.
And the thing is, modern special ops they cover a lot of these areas
and spies. There were definitely spies.
Yeah.
But perhaps what there weren't were reasonably large units that were designed to operate behind enemy lines for long periods. That's not something they went into.
No, and of course forms of guerrilla warfare go back as far as we know in history.
Yeah.
So you could say that guerrilla fighters are a form of special ops.
Well, SpecOps to me suggests they're extremely highly trained.
Yes.
Which guerrillas are not necessarily.
No. So I think the answer's sort of a bit, yes.
Sort of a bit, but those the world's ultimate, etc. shows massive pinch of salt.
Or indeed, I've been on a show, I think 2 episodes of Ancient Assassins, and I make no qualms with that. That is absolutely falls within the category that Lloyd is describing, and it's quite interesting working on a show like that because they very much try to extract from you. So they ask you a historical question and they try to angle it. So could they have been? Maybe they wore camo paint to do these guerrilla attacks.
Is it possible that there are things we don't know about these people? Yes.
Yes. So anyway, that probably answers the question, doesn't it? So,
he did it.
I did it. So Roman has asked lots of other questions. Hold on. Here's one by Aaron Thomas.
Righto. What is the shortest time for building a well-made and defended military encampment or castle? What is the overall best type of... Oh, that's a separate question. Well, the Romans, after learning how to make war by fighting Hannibal, would every night on the march fortify a camp. If you've got a very, very large army and you put it into an area, the amount of perimeter that each man is responsible for actually becomes quite small. So you can say, okay, each guy has to put one upright in the palisade and move 1 cubic yard of earth from the ditch, and then he can go and have his tea. And if you've got an army of tens of thousands of people, you can actually have a pretty usefully fortified position in less than a day, because they would march to where they were going to camp for the night and then fortify for the night. So in a matter of not many hours, you could have a fortification that was not great, but definitely worth having.
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer, isn't it? The Romans probably had got it to as fine an art as anyone else in history, and they seem to have done it in an evening.
Yeah, and the Carthaginians at the same time.
There we go. So, next, Matt Maggie Q.
Matt Maggie Q. Aha! Is the Fairbairn Sykes commando dagger of any use outside of a fighting role? No, it's for stabbing people, and that's it. You don't chop onions with it. It's not for peeling carrots. It's for stabbing people, and that's why they're so horrible. You look at them and go, this has one purpose and one only. It's for stabbing. A bit like a lot of the rondel daggers you see are for killing people. And that, you're not going to whittle with it. Rubbish for that.
Yeah, they're not very, but although at the end of the day it does have a sharp edge, so you could use it for, it's not very well adapted for those things, but you could chop carrots with it. You could pry things open with it, and knowing or having been in army cadets and knowing people who've been in the army and still in the army, whatever you give a soldier a tool for, they will use it for other things. So I'm absolutely certain, I've seen a lot of original antique or vintage, shall we say, Fairbairn Sykes daggers that have had to have the tips reshaped. I suspect that's not because of all the Germans that they've stabbed. I suspect that it's because they've been using the tip to pry something open and they've broken the tip off.
The Mark I version had a very, very thin tip, and the Mark II, they actually, so presumably they were snapping.
I'm sure that they use them for all sorts of things.
It's for stabbing. I mean, you could tow an anti-tank gun with a herd of goats. And you
big enough herd, yeah.
You could chop an onion with a Fairbairn Sykes commando dagger, but no, it's a stabby thing.
So next question.
Okay, this is Balaj Iyengar. In the 15th to 16th centuries, even the lowliest foot soldier had some sort of gambeson, padding, or some form of armour. Fast forward to the 17th to, this is a long question, to the 17th to 18th centuries, the English redcoats had no armour. What's worse, they were expected to stay in formation, face cannon fire, or a volley of muskets. Did soldiers suddenly become cheap? Granted that armours don't, it's a very long question. Granted that armours don't provide protection against bullets, but mounted dragoon guards and cuirassiers had armours, exclamation mark. What was the beginning of the question again?
So the question is, I think, why do later periods, so kind of industrial period soldiers not have forms of armour, generally speaking, but some forms of cavalry do, when lowly foot soldiers did generally have some form of armour in earlier centuries.
And did soldiers become cheap? No. A man has to be recruited, transported, trained, fed, clothed, policed, patched up when he's wounded. There's an awful lot of costs in the man. Deliced. Yes. In the Roman, go back to Roman times too. The cost of the actual man, having him in the army for perhaps 25 years, was vastly greater than the cost of the armour he was wearing. And a lot of the arguments, I think, about why did they use this armour, not that armour, and it was all down to cost. If it were down to cost, they were really penny pinching off a tiny fraction of the cost of putting an army together. The Roman army, for instance, in peacetime had to be fed, and that was a gargantuan task. They had massive granaries all around the Roman Empire, so that these soldiers had bread, and that would be for decades of peace, perhaps, in which their armour never even got used. So no, the idea that humans suddenly became cheap, I don't think is the factor that really explains this change.
No, I mean, I think the general abandonment of most forms of armour. I mean, many books will famously point out that the gorget, the ornamental gorget, is the last vestige of armour for infantry soldiers. I think the reason it was abandoned was because the majority of your concern is about people shooting you, and by and large you can't equip foot soldiers with enough armour or good enough armour to make them invulnerable to musketry and artillery. So given that you can't armour them enough to protect them from the main thing that's the threat, firearms, why bother giving them armour? Why not spend the money on giving them better firearms or nicer uniforms? Nice red. Yes. As to the cavalry, of course, cavalry, their role was to ride around and get into hand-to-hand combat. So of course they did maintain vestiges of armour to some degree, cuirassiers with a breastplate, backplate and a helmet, and occasionally hussars had iron hoops inside their fur hats, and sometimes they had chainmail arms.
And infantry, well into the period when people were wearing tricorns or cocked hats, they very often had a metal protector underneath that, because that was one threat they were worried about, a downward cut from a sabre from a passing horseman. So you wear armour to deal with what threats you're expecting.
Indeed, I mean, I know one account on the retreat to Corunna in the Napoleonic Wars. There's a British infantryman who was on rear guard, and he held off, I think it was 4 French hussars who were harassing the retreating British army, and he lived to tell the tale, but by the end of it, they said that every bit of his equipment was covered in sabre cuts, including his shako, all of his uniform, the cross belt, his backpack, his musket, and they described the bayonet as looking like a hacksaw with just lots of notches up it. But you know, he held them off and he retreated. And thick woolen uniforms shouldn't be underestimated in their ability to protect you from superficial blows and cuts, and definitely a leather shako is actually quite good protection from a cut. I mean, try cutting through a leather tube with a top on it. Really difficult.
It's a crumple zone on your head.
Yeah, exactly. So they didn't have armour per se because they were being shot at, but what they were wearing did confer some degree of protection against sabre cuts. Not so much against bayonet thrusts, but that's another topic. But I would say one final thing. We do see armour come back in World War I. And when trench raiding became a big thing, you know, the National Army Museum in London has a big collection of trench raiding weapons and armour. And they literally brought back armour. They had breastplates, they had helmets with visors, types of bever, and
some of the German stuff actually looks quite Gothic.
Yeah, they had mail, early tank drivers, even for shrapnel, have some chainmail. So, you know, armour did come back, and I don't we see armour has come back again today. So today, because our soldiers cost Western forces so much money to train and equip and look after and insure, we want to make sure that they're wearing body armour so that if one piece of shrapnel flies across a battlefield, that doesn't put them out of action. So armour has come back to a degree.
Yes. So, I hope that satisfies you.
On to the next question.
Right.
Vigard Ryan.
Okay, what would be the best secondary stroke backup weapon for a modern day soldier if he were not allowed to use a pistol stroke firearm but had to choose an older weapon like a sword, knife, axe, etc.? Knife is a quick answer to that one. Knives are very easy to carry and they're ever so stabby, and you can find a gap, and soldiers do actually carry them and use them to effect. So I'm going to go with knife.
That's the answer, and that is what they carry. Soldiers I know do have knives. Of course, not only as a weapon, but as utilitarian. It's a tool as well. But it depends partly who they're fighting as to what type of knife. Because we get into the body armour issue, and actually we could go back to things like rondel daggers and stuff like that, because the type of body armour that an increasing number of the world's soldiers are wearing, something like a rondel dagger might in fact be the best type of dagger for them to carry.
Yeah, but you can't chop onions with it.
You can't chop onions with it, so yeah.
And I've played Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and a knife instant fatal every time, so knife.
So this is a really good question by Mike Barchan Morris.
Okay. Oh, also, this is a follow-up question to something. What are your thoughts on Lars Anderson's fast archery? I'm not sure many... Okay, for those of you who don't know, Lars Anderson released an incredibly successful viral video in which he showed that that archery is in fact every bit as effective as machine gun fire, and that whilst falling off your horse, you were expected to be able to shoot, was it 3 arrows or something? And he demonstrates this by jumping onto a pad off a vaulting horse in a gym. No. If you're galloping along and suddenly you fall off your horse, you have other priorities. Then I think I'll get my bow out and load it and shoot a couple of times. I think not dying horribly right now is your top priority. I think
the point that lots of people make, and I've made in a past video, and that Lars himself admits openly, I've had a bit of communication with him directly. Incidentally, I made a video which wasn't about Lars, it was about speed shooters, and he, by pure coincidence, released his video about 2 weeks after. And lots of people went, "You've made this video criticising Lars Anderson," and I'd actually, if you look at the dates, you can see I released my video before. Anyway, and the point that we all agree on is that he's using very light bows. He's using, for the most part, about a 30-pound draw weight bow.
Really simple pinch grip.
Yeah, and people say, oh, but a 30-pound bow could still kill you, could still hunt with it, it could still be used in tribal warfare at close range. Yes.
Look at the nocks on his arrows as well, they're that wide.
Yes, that's very true, and indeed in tribal combat at close range, it could, if you trained yourself to be as fast as Lars, you could be a super lethal tribesman in that type of combat. But on a, say, medieval battlefield, whether we're looking at English longbows or whether we're looking at Turkish recurve bows or Mongol bows, they all seem to be above 100 pounds draw weight, and you cannot shoot that fast with a 100-pound draw weight bow. Well, nobody's ever done it yet. Anyway, I won't say it can't be done, but nobody above about 50-60 pound draw weight bow can do this speed shooting.
So very, very nice trick shooting, impressive trick shooting, great for that.
And that's an important part. It is still a very impressive skill, isn't it? I mean, and the fact that he hits plates and stuff, yeah, we don't know how many edits he's done, but...
Oh yeah, he must have practiced all afternoon to get that good. But the notion that that's what archers of the old world used to look like, no. And when he said that there were no such things as back quivers on the back, that's just wrong. Look at all those representations of Persians on the gates of Babylon and so forth. They use plenty of arrows taken from the back. Quivers.
Right. Luca Modica
Hello,
says,
Luca.
Oh, there's those faces again.
I am left-handed. I know that left-handed people could not be knights, couldn't they? But they had to be left-handed heroes who were not knights, and throughout history, question mark. Well put. Left-handedness is a problem for ancient warfare if you've got loads of people who are all trained to guard the guy next to them with a shield and a spear and so forth. But the notion that there weren't left-handed people in the ancient world, I think
there were.
Is groundless. There is the quite nice idea that you put all left-handers on one end of the formation, and you have a guy with two shields on the join to cover the gap. Left-handed people, a bit like a left-handed tennis player, can often do well in a tournament because he has a slight advantage. Having some left-handers on your side might be quite handy, and you might decide, oh, let's put them on the far left of the formation, and maybe they can do some good to the open right side of their opponents. So the idea that they were always forbidden to fight left-handed, I think seems too far-fetched. And as for you weren't allowed to be a knight, I know of no such rule. Why would you not allowed? Why would no one knight? I would knight you, but you're left-handed.
We can categorically state actually that's not correct. First of all, there are fencing treatises that specifically talk about how to fight against left-handers. So Manciolino 1531 talks about how to fight against the left-hander and what to do against a right-hander if you are a left-hander. So absolutely there were left-handed swordsmen or fighters in the medieval and Renaissance period. Secondly, yes, there was a bias against left-handers. Left-handers were sinister.
They were sinister a lot.
And yes, that's true. So they're probably children, just as frankly in my parents' and grandparents' time, were discouraged or tried to steer away from being left-handed. I incidentally was the complete opposite. I write left-handed, but I'm right-handed in every other way, which I can't explain.
I was going to say that writing is one of the technologies that educators put great emphasis on biasing with right and left-handed, because if you are trying to write in ink and you try left-handed, you then smear your own ink, and people were taught until well into the 20th century to write right-handed even if they were left-handed.
As I understand it in British law, which hand you write with is what dictates whether you're recorded as being left or right-handed. So legally I'm left-handed, even though if I were to stab someone, I would stab them with my right hand, which could be useful. No, it wouldn't be.
Okay.
But so yeah, the long and the short is that left-handers were around, but they could be useful as well.
Could be useful, and some people might perhaps be perhaps less trained troops. If you're trying to get a load of peasants to just act all together with their spears and shields today, could you just hold the spear in the other hand? Might have happened, I can believe that. But the notion that you couldn't be a knight, I think there's a false premise in the question.
Absolutely, you could be. And I would also just throw in one final point on that. Actually, there is an advantage to training with both hands and being able to switch hands. Sometimes you come up against an opponent, and by switching hands it's advantageous to do that. Or indeed, you get injured in one of your hands. And in fact, there's a cutlass manual from 1859 which says it gives you all of these complicated drills to teach the sailors, teach the seamen, and once they've done it, they say, now do it with the left hand. So they actually were drilling them on Victorian naval ships to train cutlass both with left and right hand, and they give the reason that if you're hitting the right hand, if you're right-handed and disabled, you can switch to the left hand. I also know of one explicit account of a Sudanese dervish doing this, where he got hit in one arm with a sword, I think, and he switched the sword to his other hand, and this was recorded because it was impressive, essentially. So, Quentin Williams. Quentin
Williams. How large did armies get throughout history? Hang on, there's a bit more to it. For example, were the average armies numbered in a few hundred inches? But still a gargantuan question.
Big.
Ever so. Yes.
Tens of thousands.
With the big civilization, obviously the more organised the civilization, the greater the time of plenty, the greater population you can feed, and to excess, so you can actually have people who are not just being farmers all the time, but can be soldiers. So that tends to be the height of the Roman Empire, the height of the Chinese Empire, and so forth. So yes, it is, I suppose, an indicator of how well a society is doing overall, how big an army it can field.
I mean, the Battle of Waterloo had 100,000+ people at it, didn't it? Whereas the Battle of Agincourt had around, I think, 20, 25, 30,000 people at it. Yeah, so there's a rough.
But Gaugamela with Alexander against Darius, it was way bigger. Oh, hang on, or is it Xerxes? It's Darius, isn't it? It's Darius. Yes, it's Darius. That was way bigger than Waterloo again.
Really? I have to say also, if you put it in the context of the period, that's doubly, quadruply more impressive given the population sizes, because after the Industrial Revolution, population sizes started to go up a lot. So you have to relate it to population size, surely. And
yes, but it's also the people who can be spared.
Indeed. So.
Are we doing right? When do we actually finish this?
Well, should we do 3 more?
There should be 3 more. Okay.
Right, we can edit this bit out. So, had either of you lived in the Middle Ages? That's actually quite interesting.
Okay, Jacob Praz
Yes.
says, had either of you lived in the Middle Ages and had a choice of occupation stroke social position, which would you choose and why?
If you could choose your social position, surely the top.
That makes it really easy. I don't
Holy Roman
I don't want to
Emperor.
be throwing poo into a stream for a living. So yeah, being really
Is that
high
a
up
job? In Monty Python, I'm sure that's a job.
There are people who, and outside a lot of cities in Britain, there was a river called something like Shit Creek, because that's what it was used for. There were people, yes, who took poo out of cities and threw it into
Well,
the
let's
creek.
say, so we could make this
Yep.
question more interesting, I think, by saying you were roughly middle class. What profession would you choose in the Middle Ages in Europe?
Oh, rough to middle class. Well, architect would be pretty good, making cathedrals.
Yeah,
I would just tuck my gloves as a master mason into my belt, show that I've qualified, but I don't use them anymore. And I could draw nice geometry and tell people to do stuff and get lots of glory. Although, one drawback is that a lot, in fact, of cathedrals took so flipping long to build that if you started one, it was your design, your baby, you would never actually get to see it finished. Or maybe someone who travelled a lot. So you could
merchant of
yes,
some kind,
but then there's a lot of sea travel then.
And risk.
Yes,
potentially,
yes.
Risk of disease heightened as well.
Overall, living in the medieval period is not actually fantastically
Not
appealing.
great,
Because
no.
even if you're a king and you get a little cut and an infection, there's no penicillin.
Infant mortality very high. No chocolate. That's a deal breaker for me.
Yeah, he's got a point, actually.
But so my answer would be arms dealer. I'd like to be a medieval arms dealer,
Right,
basically.
okay, so what you are in fact now.
Basically, yes. Yeah. I don't think I'd want to be a soldier. I don't think being a soldier sounds like a good idea at all.
Well,
Really.
do you like camping and hiking? So, everyone at this is fight camp. We're all in tents, okay? He's staying in a hotel.
So that gives you the answer to your question,
so,
doesn't
yeah, if you don't like camping and hiking, don't be a soldier.
it? No. Well, you're riding, surely.
Not everyone gets to ride, though.
Yeah. No. Overall, I'd like to be some kind of merchant or artisan. I think making things or selling things or both.
Okay, there we go.
Right. The phone's going out again.
Oh, it was 3 more, so now there are 2 more.
Right. That was a. Oh, I think we might have got to the end. We'll have to.
No, I don't. There were hordes. Although we have skipped past a few in our haste. Steady now. We could building the suspense now. We're probably using some background music. You know, like those 3-minute games in the Crystal Maze. You know, to make something that's actually quite dull seem exciting. We'll find some on YouTube that we could use for free to cover this bit.
Okay.
Aha.
What about? This is the last question.
Right, Luke Bidden. Who would? It's a who would win question. Okay.
Last question.
Right. Who would win 500 British First World War riflemen with no machine guns nor artillery, or 1,000 Roman soldiers at the height of their military power, each presumably pitched against the other?
Rifleman.
Well, the First World War British rifleman was at the end of a tradition that came out of the Victorian period, and in the Victorian period, the British Army had many times fought against often quite largely outnumbering armies armed with spears and so forth, and had very, very consistently won.
And as an owner of a 303 SMLE, 303 rifle rounds go through anything that the Romans can kind of carry,
and it scutum straight through.
It's going to go straight through the scutum, straight through any type of lorica they're wearing, and they're going to be dead, and possibly through the person behind as well.
And he actually has them on a flat grassy plain, so there's no hiding involved. So the British would just mow the front rank down, then the second rank, then the third, and then the Romans would then. I think
the real question should be how many seconds would the Romans last?
Oh! Wow, I didn't know you fought like that. That seemed rather unnecessary.
You got me in the eye.
I got you in the eye. Right, anyway, the camera ate some of the footage. We were halfway through a question about Romans being mown down mercilessly by First World War British.
And I think it's a question not of who would win, but how quickly would the Romans die? How many seconds do we give them?
Yes, I think Ladbrokes would probably give you evens on maybe around 45 seconds. And then the Roman army would think something happening here that we don't understand, let's all run away.
Yeah, the Romans haven't got anything that will stop 303 rounds. They're goners with no Spandaus or Brens required.
None at all. No, it's open field, flat trajectory, it's all over.
There we go, yeah. So,
Right.
British Army 1, Roman Army 0.
Huzzah! Not a great victory. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for coming to Fight Camp, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Ciao.